I remember seeing the first trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds back in 2023, and pretty much on the spot, I immediately and illogically declared that it would be my game of the year whenever it ended up coming out. My love for the series was at an all-time high since I got into it when Monster Hunter World released. World and Monster Hunter Rise were the games I by far put the most time into during that phase of my life. Something about the Monster Hunter gameplay loop grabbed me and wouldn't let go, even though it didn't initially click with me. Over time, I came to consider Monster Hunter World one of my top 10 favorite games of all time, a list that does not change often. So I was confident that when the day finally came of Monster Hunter Wilds release, I would be enjoying the next evolution in the game that I had come to love more than any other over the past decade. A brand new experience, a brand new world, brand new monsters to hunt, gear to craft, and fights to master. I devoured Wilds when it came out, beating the main plot and post-game content within a week of its release. It was fun and smoothed out many of the rougher edges that had been present in previous games in the series. But all wasn't well. Discourse arose in the community with accusations lobbed towards Capcom that they made the game too easy to cater to an ever-growing audience who were discovering these games for the first time. That in an attempt to appeal to as wide a base as possible, the efficiencies and streamlining of the game's core loop had diminished the experience. At first, I simply dismissed these comments as elitist, as a replication of these same types of attitudes that permeate the get good portion of the Souls community whenever they felt any small concession was being made at all that might make the game any easier for people to play. For veteran players, the beginning of any Monster Hunter game is easy. You get through the story to make it to the more difficult post-game content, and that's where the game really begins. I completed the story and the initial post-game offerings, and I had to step away for a while as the birth of my second child restricted my time to play games at all. But this discourse has kind of stuck with me, and I began to wonder, in the process to streamline the Monster Hunter experience and make it as welcoming as possible, had Capcom lost a piece of Monster Hunter's soul, a portion of its rough edges that made it beloved by an ever-growing fanbase? And did I truly still feel like this game was my de facto game of the year? What is going on, everybody? Welcome back at last to the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who play them, and the memories made along the way. As always, I am your host. My name is Eric. It means so much to me that you are here today, checking out the show, wherever, whenever, in time and space you may be located. I have not put out a mainline episode of the Unlockables since we concluded Guiding Keys, the story of Kingdom Hearts, back in January. And then I had a lot of stuff lined up that I wanted to get done, but my second son, Noah, decided that he didn't want to wait full term to be born, and he ended up being born 11 weeks early. And so for the past couple of months, aside from an appearance on a show here or there when my free time has allowed me to, I really have not done any work or any sort of planning for the Unlockables. I've been playing some games in the background as my time has allowed me, but not really anything with any kind of mind on making content around, if that makes sense. But we are back. I have a schedule. I have games that I really want to talk about, and we're going to start that off with this episode today. But before we do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody in the Unlockables community, friends made in the podcasting community, across all the other shows, all the friends I've made online, for the overwhelming support that you guys showed myself, my wife, and our newborn son who had to stay in the NICU because he was 11 weeks premature. The outpouring of support was absolutely incredible. You know, at the end of the day, I haven't met any of you in person, and the fact that you're willing to put such time and effort into supporting us and just messaging and reaching out and making sure that we're okay really, really meant the world to us. So before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much out there if you're listening. Really, really appreciate it. If you would like to join and check out that community, I would highly recommend you go over to my Linktree at linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. You can find all of my social media links to the show there, as well as an invitation link to the Discord. I'm trying to be better about building a Discord, building a community, and doing some more interactive things to make it a place where people can come and talk about video games, considering that's the whole premise of my show. Is I want to improve the quality of the conversation around video games as a whole. So go ahead and jump into the Discord and say hey to all the incredible people that are in there. And really, I look at my Discord as kind of like a funnel to the other bigger shows who have Discords that I'm a part of, because they all do such amazing work in cultivating their communities, and their Discords are all way better than my Discord will ever be. Join mine and then join the other ones, and you'll be amongst an incredible group of people who have some really, really deep, thoughtful, smart conversations around this medium that we all love. So go do that, linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. With that being said, let's skip forward to the point where we talk about the game I want to talk about today. And that is, of course, one of my most anticipated games of this year, Capcom's Monster Hunter Wilds. Monster Hunter Wilds is a 2025 action RPG developed and published by Capcom and is considered the direct successor to Monster Hunter World. The game was released worldwide on February 25th, 2025 on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, with support for cross-platform play, which was incredible, which allowed me to play with people across all different platforms in the community. It was amazing. It was developed in Capcom's famous RE engine, which has been around since 2014 and was originally developed for Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. It is the same engine that Monster Hunter Rise, Devil May Cry 5, and the most recent RE remakes were made in. Fun fact, Monster Hunter World notably was not made in the RE engine. It was made in an engine known as MT Framework. This is my first time hearing about MT Framework. I don't really know anything about it, other than it is a game in which it is a game engine in which you make video games, surprisingly enough. The only engines that I'm intimately familiar with, and when I say intimately, I don't have a working knowledge of how they work, but I know enough about them and their history that I can talk about them, are the RE engine, Unreal 5, and then a lot of the stuff that Square Enix used to do that I don't even know if they're using the engines that I know about, such as like Crystal Tools or the Luminous engine anymore on their side. But I digress. Going into some reception and some review scores for Monster Hunter Wilds. On Metacritic, there are 3 scores amongst the 3 platforms. On PS5, it is sitting at an 88. Windows, it is sitting at an 88. And Xbox Series X, it is sitting at a 90. I don't really know what would be responsible for the 2-point difference, other than I know Metacritic is a review aggregator. On OpenCritic, it is sitting at a 95% recommend. Destructoid gave it a 9.5 out of 10, Edge Magazine a 7 out of 10, Eurogamer 4 out of 5, Famitsu 39 out of 40, Game Informer 8.75 out of 10, GameSpot 8 out of 10, Games Radar Plus 4.5 out of 5, and last but certainly not least, IGN gave it an 8 out of 10. Monster Hunter Wilds sold 8 million units within 3 days of its release, and by the end of March 2025, it had surpassed 10 million units. It reached a peak concurrent player count on Steam of 1.38 million players, which was considered the 5th highest count for a game at that time, and it had the largest physical sale launch of any PS5 title in Japan so far amongst the PlayStation 5's lifespan. So really, really great numbers for Monster Hunter Wilds, and I think it just goes to show you how big the Monster Hunter fan base has gotten since Monster Hunter World. And it makes sense considering how big a success Monster Hunter World was, and that kind of word of mouth about how good that game was has carried that momentum forward to the release of Wilds. And also really smart move by Capcom. I consistently, almost always, see Monster Hunter World on sale on Steam for like $10. So getting big games for that level of money is quite the return on your investment. So if you've been curious at all about checking out Monster Hunter World, or I know that even Monster Hunter Rise is on sale often enough for a relatively low price, there's never been a better time to jump in and check it out, because like I said, those games are always on sale. And even though Wilds has come out, I still know that World has a very dedicated player base of people who still play that game. So starting off, like we always do, with my personal history and experience with not only Monster Hunter Wilds, but with the series in general, just so you guys know where I am coming from during my analysis of the game. I tried to get into Monster Hunter back when I owned a PSP. I don't know which specific title it would have been, but I remember getting one because the concept of fighting large dinosaurs with big swords appealed to me, even as a younger kid, even as a adult in his mid-30s, his early to mid-30s. Fighting dinosaurs with a big sword is really, really cool. I remember getting it. I remember trying it out, and I ended up bouncing off of it pretty quickly because I'm sure I just didn't understand the obtuse systems or how that game was meant to be played at all, because it is a different type of game. It is a different style of game. You're not just mowing down tons of enemies and doing quick combat encounters all the time. It requires a level of dedication and preparation to go into each hunt, and that was part of the core gameplay loop and part of the appeal. I would move away from Monster Hunter for several years. The series passed me by. Title after title kept coming out. I had no interest in returning to it after my initial experience. That was until Monster Hunter World came out. As one does in the hobby, in the community of video games, the hype train build up for Monster Hunter World was insane. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was at the E3 where they were promoting Monster Hunter World, I think E3 2017, and they had a gigantic booth set up with a huge Rathalos like bursting out of like the wall that was the foliage with its claws forward that was like swooping down to grab you. It was very, very, very cool. Maybe if I find the picture, I'll make it the thumbnail on the episode. But I got drawn into the hype cycle after that because the game looked incredible. I ended up picking it up for the PlayStation 4. I did a few missions, and still, it didn't grab me. I didn't grasp the concept of the game. I couldn't understand what I was supposed to be doing, or why I was getting mountains of materials. Why was I picking up all these things from the foliage? What all these menus I had to navigate meant. I didn't understand how any of the weapons worked. I couldn't really find a weapon that felt comfortable with the way that I normally play games. There was nothing that I felt really matched my playstyle, the way I like to play. So I set it down again for a little bit, and that all changed when one of my friends reached out to me, and she wanted me to play it. She wanted me to play in their hunting group. I didn't have any friends that I knew were playing it, so I decided maybe if I gave it a try with somebody that I knew who was playing it and knew what they were doing, maybe I would understand it. And she knew way more things about the game than me and was able to kind of teach me the ropes. And that was when things kind of started to click into place. I found a weapon that I really liked in the switch axe. I learned about weapon and armor crafting and how to set up my loadouts. I also dedicated myself to understanding the game better. And I ended up watching hours of weapon tutorials put up on a YouTube channel by a group called Eric's. I believe they're a group, or they were a single person supported by a group. Don't know. And those were really in depth, and they offered a mechanical understanding of the way that the game was played, of each weapon's function and how you were supposed to be played, what combos you were supposed to be doing, how certain moves could lead into other moves, how that could help you reposition for the monsters. So they really went in depth, and those weapon tutorials really went a long way into my understanding of how the game was supposed to be played. Beyond just like, oh, if you hit these buttons, they'll do this. The weapon tutorials went into how the weapon should be used and how you would use that to position yourself around a monster. And so I would watched all those a ton, and I felt like I came away with a base level knowledge of how each weapon worked, to the point where I expanded my comfort zone and I started playing different weapons like Charge Blade and Longsword. So I was doing my playthrough with my friend. We were playing it together, and then I started kind of my own playthrough by myself to see if I could, do it by myself. There was a moment playing World where everything kind of clicked into place and everything kind of came together. All these disparate parts of things that I was learning came together and clicked. And in the community, they often call this like the aha moment, or literally the moment where everything kind of clicks for you, where Monster Hunter grabs you fully and says, all right, you're a Monster Hunter fan now. And for me, and I know a lot of other people have this story too, as first-time players of this series in Monster Hunter World, it was during the Anjanath fight. That's when I felt the first real test in the game. The Anjanath in World is the first point where the game really tests you, and it's a challenging fight. And I failed it several times because it's a deep difficulty spike from what you've fought before. But when I finally beat it, that is when I emerged out the other side as a true Monster Hunter fan. My understanding of the game had increased so much. I understood the importance of spacing, waiting for your moment, of my weapon's different utilities, when to be aggressive, when to kind of pull back. I felt like I finally got it. I, in turn, turned around and shared this newfound love of Monster Hunter with my friends. I got them to play. I showed them how the game worked the same way that my friend had shown me. She got busy and we kind of lost touch after that. So I was playing Monster Hunter World with a new group of friends. I completed a solo playthrough of the game with the bow and arrow, since that's what my friend played, and it was kind of like a sort of a thanks and homage to the person who got me into Monster Hunter. And with my new friend group, it was mostly a group of my college friends, we spent hours hunting and playing the game and doing some of the most intense challenges. And to this day, it remains some of my fondest gaming memories. After that, I was a dedicated fan of the series. I got Monster Hunter Rise. I played both the expansions for Rise. I got Iceborne, put a ton of hours into those games. And like I said, when Monster Hunter Wilds was announced, it was instantly my most anticipated game of when the year it was going to come out. So it came out in 2025. It was my most anticipated game of 2025. Like I said, Monster Hunter World is in my top 10 favorite games of all time. It changed my relationship with gaming. At the time, I was really firmly entrenched to playing shooters, competitive Overwatch, that sort of thing. It's all I wanted to play alongside like your standard AAA releases, because that's what I thought video games were at the time. But Monster Hunter World, even though it was a big AAA release, taught me to appreciate a different pace of play and a different style of game that was definitely outside of my comfort zone. It definitely has some rough edges. It creates friction and it doesn't give you anything for free, but that is why I absolutely fell in love with it. It taught me to appreciate the process of playing the game, not just the result of playing a game, not just the experiencing the story or experiencing the thoughts that I have with the game. It made me appreciate the entire process, even the moments when we were standing in town waiting to start a hunt, even the 45-minute down to the wire hunts where the monster had run all over the map. It really led me to appreciate a different style of game that I think kind of built a foundation of tolerance for me and really opened doors to me wanting to try more different kinds of gaming experiences.
Hey, Unlockables listeners, it's Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog, here to tell you about Monster Hunter Wilds. As a kind of first-time player in Monster Hunter, I did play some of Rise on the Switch, but this is my first time really diving in, especially with multiplayer and stuff like that. Monster Hunter Wilds is a fantastic entry point for someone like me. It is a great way for you to get into the game, have a little bit of tutorialization, have a story to kind of introduce you to the concepts of what's going on, although I don't think the story in Monster Hunter Wilds is good really at all. I think it's pretty bad. But it does the job of introducing you to what Monster Hunter is, which is not something that I can say about my other past attempts to get into Monster Hunter. I remember trying one on the Wii for like 30 minutes and being like, I don't know what the hell is going on here. I'm going to play something else. So for that, great entry point, and I think that's the point, a big point of emphasis for them when doing Monster Hunter Wilds was they wanted to make sure that new people could jump in. They want to capitalize on the success that Monster Hunter World and Rise had and really blow this one up. And hey, it looks like it worked. Now, that's not to say that this is not still a menu and UI nightmare like Monster Hunter has always been. It still is, trust me. There are menus within menus and upgrades inside of upgrades and things like that. But at least you get to kill some monsters first before you have to start dealing with all of that in Monster Hunter Wilds. And when it comes to killing monsters, boy does Monster Hunter Wilds do the trick. I really love the monster designs, the monster animations, the music during the fights, and especially my beloved Charge Blade. I had such a good time mastering the Charge Blade and going through the different levels of monsters throughout the low rank story, and then the high rank story and some of the event quests that have been updated since. I do think that some of the streamlining that's been introduced, as I kind of understand it, because again, relatively new with Monster Hunter Wilds here, I do think that some of the preparation and things have been filed down in a way that makes it a little bit less interesting on paper. Again, no personal experience to speak of. Maybe Eric here can talk about that. But the absolute bread and butter, fighting the monsters, aka the reason that anybody is buying a Monster Hunter game, is A+, incredible stuff. It is just a sequence of the best designed boss fights that video games have to offer. I love the way that you can intuit how the fight is going based on the monster's behavior. You can figure out how much health the monster has left, whether it's injured, etc., based on its animations. I love the collaborative aspect of playing the game multiplayer, and I love when 2 or 3 Charge Blade players can gang up and just bully the fuck out of a monster. It's a great time. So when Monster Hunter Wilds came out, there was some whinging from longtime series fans about how it's been watered down, how the sacred will take you automatically to the places, you don't have to find the monsters anymore, and I get that. Like, some of that would be a little bit more interesting if you had to use what you know about the monster to find it out in the world, but all in all told, it's a fantastic game. It's one of my favorite experiences of 2025 so far, and again, the bread and butter, fighting those monsters, chef kiss. So Eric, thanks for letting me be a part of the show here. I appreciate it. For those who don't know me again, my name is Dave Jackson. I'm from the Tales from the Backlog podcast. And if you want to know more about my thoughts about Monster Hunter Wilds, I have a 2+ hour long episode on Tales from the Backlog about the game, where we go into great detail about does the story matter when evaluating Monster Hunter Wilds, and the combat, the loop, and things like that. So if you want to check that out, you can find it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Tales from the Backlog. Thanks, Eric. See you, buddy.
Let's talk about some development history here. So the game was directed by Yuya Tokuda, who also directed Monster Hunter World. There were several producers on the game. Ryozo Sugimoto, who worked on basically every Monster Hunter game and Street Fighter VI, alongside Hironobu Takeshita, Genki Tsunano, and Yuki Matsuzaki. The composer of the soundtrack was Miwako Chinon, not the same composer as World and Rise, so different composer for Wilds. One of the main credited artists is Kaname Fujioka, who is also a credited creator of the Monster Hunter World series. So during the development, which, by the way, development for this game pretty much started right away after Monster Hunter World was kind of up and off the ground and going, they realized that they were going to have a very, very large increase in their player base because of how popular Monster Hunter World was. So they spent a very, very long time in just kind of the early research and development phase of development to figure out what the features would be and how the game would play to kind of cater to a wider array of player expectations for what a sequel would be. So like I said, by 2024, Wilds had already been in development for 5 to 6 years, which is insane because you have to think they were working on so many other things at Capcom. Maybe I just underestimate how big of a company Capcom actually is. But to me, Capcom's output over the last decade has kind of been insane. Resident Evil remakes, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, Pragmata's coming up. Like their pace of output is just, and the quality that they've maintained, we don't know anything about Pragmata yet, but it looks pretty crazy, is kind of nuts. So the fact that they put the team together and basically started working on Wilds right away as Rise was being worked on too is kind of insane. There were some points highlighted during the development that the team wanted to focus on. So obviously they wanted to maintain that feeling of a real ecosystem, a real natural environment where monsters kind of move around the world naturally and interacted with the world around them, similar how they did to Monster Hunter World. That was a really big emphasis. They wanted to move away from what they called the excursion model. So everything in Wilds takes place in like a seamless open world. That excursion loop that I was referring to, that's referring to the usual loop that you did of, at least in my experience in Monster Hunter Worlds, of like where you go back to town, you pick a hunt, you prep for that hunt, and you execute that hunt, and then you return to the town, and then you repeat. And in that loop, you're crafting new weapons, you're crafting armor, you're setting up loadouts for each specific hunt. You're getting super granular with how each hunt is approached. With this new system, with this new world, you can move from one hunt to another right on the map without having to start new lobbies and pick new quests for each hunt. So a definite departure from the standard gameplay loop of the last two games that I've played for sure. As you guys can probably guess, I'm coming at this from a point of view of having played Monster Hunter World as my first game. So all the analysis I'm doing is in relation to my experience with World and Rise. If any of you guys who are more longer time fans come across this, I would love to hear from you guys to kind of see how World differs from your experience of the older games, as well as how Wilds differs from Worlds. I know a lot of the older games had crazy stuff like sections of the map weren't directly connected to one another, and if you wanted to track the monster, you had to like hit him with a paintball. Just crazy stuff like that. So the goal was to make the entire process of getting to the monster and hunting it as painless, as effortless as possible. And the way that they help to do this with a gigantic open world is they put in a mount called the Sacred. And that is a mount that you can, that basically, it's like a chocobo in Monster Hunter Wilds. If you remember from Monster Hunter Rise, you had the Palamutes, basically your dog companions that you could jump on and run around the map and drifting doggos. Drifting doggos, unfortunately, not in Wilds, but the Sacred pretty much fills that role for this game. And really, the Sacred can do anything for you. It basically, you jump on it. You can drive it manually. You can drive it, I say, as I'm treating it like a vehicle. You can drive it manually, but you can pin the monster on your map, and the Sacred will just autopath towards you. So it removes the friction of having to like traverse across the map when your Uber Bird will basically just take you to where you want to go. There's an up and down side to this. I'll talk about this a little bit when I get more of the gameplay, but while your Sacred is auto-pathing, you can pull out your weapon, you can sharpen it, you can grab materials as you go by, you can craft items without having to stop the process of movement towards the hunt. All of the weapons return, so you have longsword, light and heavy bowgun, charge blade, greatsword, hunting horn, dual blade, sword and shield, switch axe, bow, hunting horn, hammer, lance, and gun lance. And their movesets have more or less been maintained from the previous two games that I've played. At least the weapons that I have tried out, from bow, switch axe, charge blade, greatsword, longsword being some of the ones that I tend to go towards more often. The core gameplay for those weapons has been carried forward across the two games, while the wire bugs are removed and you don't have as much like horizontal movement or vertical movement just at your disposal whenever. The Sacred kind of makes up for the movement. You can mount it and unmount it during fights. there is something that they did add. First of all, they added back the slinger. So the slinger is back so you can pick up stuff in the environment and shoot slinger shots at the monster to kind of like get its attention. Or even sometimes some of the slinger ammo is like very, very powerful and can kind of even stagger the monster. But Wild's big thing that it introduced and kind of changes the way the game is played is focus mode. And focus mode is introduced and it allows you to, if you hold one of the trigger buttons, it can bring up an aiming reticule and allow you to basically have targeted strikes on specific monster parts. And this piggybacks with the new wound system where brightly telegraphed wounds will open on a monster's skin after you hit them over and over so much. Hitting these wounds while in focus mode will unleash a devastating combo, which will sometimes stagger, sometimes knock down the monster. So a lot of the mounting stuff that the slinger did in Monster Hunter Worlds does not return, even though the slinger does. But you have this focus mode that kind of rewards you for being strategic about your attacks. So if you've been working on like the back leg of a monster and you go into focus mode and see that there's a wound, attacking that wound will do more damage and potentially stagger or knock down the monster, which opens it up for more damage, for you to do bigger combos, for you to pull off some more of your flashier combos that do more damage with your weapon. The monster roster, of course, a Monster Hunter game is only as good as its roster of monsters. I'm saying this with an asterisk by it because I do understand that they will dramatically expand the roster of available monsters as the game continues to live out its life cycle, taking Wild's base roster of monsters, knowing that there are better things to come as the game lives on. I felt like the at launch roster here was a little bit weaker than Monster Hunter World. It just feels like that because, at least to me, it felt like there was a noticeable absence of elder dragons in the base game. Like in World, you got to, after you kind of got through the main stuff with Zora Magdaros, you had hunts for Teostra, Kushal Daora, Valhazak, Nergigante. But I do think there are some definite standouts here for sure. We have to talk about the flagship monster, which is the monster that's on the box, right? Every Monster Hunter has like its flagship monster. Nergigante was in World, Magnamalo was in Rise. This iteration of the flagship monster is called Arkveld. I think Arkveld is fantastic. It is every bit as ferocious and intimidating as Nergigante and Magnamalo. It's a ferocious beast with chain-like appendages that like come off of its elbow, and it will just beat your ass with them if you don't space them, or if you don't space yourself properly. So that fight is probably the most intense in like the base game. It's really, really quite incredible with just how aggressive Arkveld is. It kind of reminded me of the first time I fought Nergigante, although I still maintain that the initial fight with Nergigante in base World is kind of one of the most amazing moments I've ever had in a video game. New Udra is a literal inferno mixed with like a Lovecraftian squid monster. And that is unique to my Monster Hunter experience. It's just like an on-fire octopus squid monster that like slithers across the ground and has like 8 legs and lights itself on fire. So I've never seen anything like that in my Monster Hunter experience. Ray Dow is a flying wyvern that controls lightning. His final area when you have him on low health is an insane spectacle. His arena for the final fight as he is dying. A storm is like swirling overhead, and he flips his horns forward to make kind of like a rail gun that will charge up and like shoot lightning bolts at you as lightning bolts are like raining down. Absolute spectacle of a fight. La Labrina is like this spider that kind of like dances around almost like a ballet dancer, and it can paralyze you, and it has like a flower on its butt that will let off paralyzing spores into the arena. So that's one where you really have to be aware of your spacing and your surroundings, because if you get hit by the spores and get paralyzed, then the spider will just come up and just mess your shit up. Spoilers for if you haven't. I'll give you a second here to if you haven't finished. Zoshia is probably the best final boss monster out there of the 3 Monster Hunter games so far. And I know I keep using the word spectacle, but that fight is an absolute spectacle in the way that it like starts off one way and then it just escalates to and almost it feels like a fight of biblical proportions. It feels like a fight at the end of an RPG where you're fighting God or some kind of like higher divine power, because that's the level of power that you're dealing with. It's absolutely incredible. And then you have some other like standard mainstays. Of course, you have Rathian and Rathlos here. Fulgur Anjanath makes a return, which was a delight because, like I said, the Anjanath fight in World was really where I grasped what the game was all about. So Anjanath as a monster is like really kind of special and important to me. So Fulgur Anjanath showing up like 3/4 of the way through the game was super cool. Same thing with Odogaron. Odogaron was another monster that I really fell in love with in World. So seeing some of those old monsters show up is really kind of cool. And I've been in the Monster Hunter community long enough now where I understand like the hype around speculating what monsters are going to be in each game, because you know everybody's got monsters that kind of mean something to them, right? It's almost a little bit like Pokemon or like the Smash reveals where we're trying to figure out what monsters are going to be in the game, and then when the monsters get revealed, it's like this big thing. We're like, oh yeah, like I remember I had an awesome fight with that guy in that last game, or you know, like me with Anjanath, be like, yeah, Anjanath is back. That's awesome because like that was the point where I got introduced to the series. So monster roster, monster reveal, really, really big deal for these type of games. Like I said, I felt the starting roster was a little bit weaker than World, but I know they're going to add more monsters. I'm sure of it. As of the last time I was playing, I haven't kept up with too much with what's going on. I know they were adding Mizutsune, which was a great monster from Rise, and I'm sure they're going to be adding some other things. I hope they really, really dive into the back catalog of monsters that they have. I know that I was reading some comments. I don't know if it was on the Reddit or just browsing social media. People were saying that they were tired of Zinogre getting into every single game. So it'd be really cool to see some really, really deep cuts or see some monsters that people have been asking for a long time. As far as the visual presentation, I mean, the game it looks fantastic. It looks incredible. I heard there were some optimization things on PC that kind of didn't cause it to run as well. I played it on a base PS5. I didn't change any of the graphical settings, and I thought the game looked amazing. The environments are very vibrant and detailed. There are little details that they go into that they didn't have to, but make the game make it feel that much more immersive. So like the way Balahara moves through the sand and the individual particles kind of shift out of the way, almost like water physics at that point, because the Balahara is burrowing through the sand. Speaking of the water physics of the Uthduna swimming through the streams and rivers, causing those to like overflow and like a wave will come and knock you down. The fire particle effects from Quematrice, which is like this, almost like this like chicken T-Rex type of monster. So like all the particle effects and all the little details about that just go into making every single fight, even the lesser fights against weaker monsters like I said, like Quematrice, which isn't like a necessarily hard monster. Those fights just feel so cool. And I don't really have any problem with any of the designs of the monsters because all the monsters look unique. They're easily identifiable from a distance. You kind of know as soon as you walk into an area and you see one exactly what it does, exactly what it's all about, just based on its design. And that's good design. And the monsters are the star of the game. It's not your little guy that you run around. It's the monsters that you fight. They're the star. So their designs have to be on point. I didn't find any issues with any of the designs. You know, I don't think I've come across a Monster Hunter design yet where I was like, I don't really know if this monster works. There are some kind of really far out there ones, but I think they're fun and unique in their own ways. The only one I would maybe say kind of perplexes me a little bit is Kirin, which is basically just an angry thunder unicorn. But I grew to like Kirin in its own way, so I don't really think there's any monster that I have an issue with in terms of its design. In terms of the fight, you know, that could be its own episode. The breaking down Monster Hunter fights, that could be a whole dedicated episode by itself, but we won't do that. For plot, as far as plot goes, there's a story. And I know maybe you would have an expectation that since I sat here and did 30 episodes of like 60 hours on the Kingdom Hearts lore going into a deep dive, that maybe I would provide you with some deep and interesting lore about the world of Monster Hunter and kind of go through and unpack that all for you. I am not going to do that. Maybe in the future, if I decide to go on a research binge sometime, maybe I'll dive into the deeper lore of the world of Monster Hunter, but it's not going to be here. The plot is fine. It's serviceable. I know that the community doesn't really like the character that the plot centers around, which I believe is Nata. I don't even remember because he was relatively unremarkable and relatively not worth remembering in any way. Yeah, the plot is fine. It's serviceable. The plot serves to move you along to the monster fights, and there are some incredible monster fights that happen during the course of the plot, which would be the thing worth talking about. The thing I do like that the plot does is, first of all, it lets your hunter have spoken words. Your hunter is voiced for what I believe is the first time. And the relationship between the hunter and the handler is kind of fleshed out a little bit more in this game, because in the previous two games, you've had like a handler who serves as your quest giver who's like, yeah, we have to do this. You have to hunt that monster. You have to hunt this monster. And I never really understood what the relationship between the hunter and the handler was. So my understanding from this game is that the hunter is basically the representative of the Hunters Guild, who has the authority to authorize quests to slay monsters. The monster hunters, the hunters of the guild, aren't just allowed to go around and wipe out ecosystems because they have that power. They have to be given a quest. They have to be given authorization by their handler to engage in a hunt that will result in the potential death of that monster. The funniest thing that came out of that was the way that your handler said it. And every time in the story that the hunter needed to hunt a monster to like protect their group or protect or advance the plot at all, the handler would go, the guild authorizes this hunt. And everybody was just like making these memes about how we were just waiting for Alma, our handler, to like let us off the chain so we could go and fight the monsters. And I thought this was kind of funny, but in the lore of the world, it actually kind of makes sense. I like the way that they frame this in the narrative, because the plot revolves around going to this new world, as kind of Monster Hunter World did, except it was called the Wilds. Going to this new place and making contact with the people there and learning about the environment there. And along the way, they kind of uncover what drives the main plot, right? And the people of this new land have never heard of the Hunters Guild. I've never heard of like the people who are exploring this world. This is like the first time they've made contact with them. They didn't think that anybody lived out here. And so these people who live in these villages, when we come through and like the village is attacked by like a giant dinosaur, and they see this crazy motherfucker like pull out a giant sword and then go fight this like 20-foot tall dinosaur, these people in this village are like, holy shit, a person like this exists that can fight these gigantic monsters. They think this is like the craziest stuff they've ever seen, which I really like, because I think that's an appropriate reaction. If I saw like a dude like jump into the river and like pull out a great sword and like start fighting a hippo, which is like the largest thing that I can think of is dangerous enough and maybe equivalent, I would be like, dude, that guy's insane. And then to consistently see this guy come out of those scenarios and survive every time, despite whether it's like a dinosaur or a dragon or a gigantic spider or like a water lizard, and he just comes out of these situations completely unscathed. The village people are like, holy shit, who are these people? Where did they come from? How do their people know how to fight gigantic reptiles? That to me is hands down the funniest part of the plot. That cracked me up so much, because it is an accurate representation of how people should react to that sort of thing. Just imagine like being the people of like a distant planet and like I don't know why I'm thinking of this scenario, just popped in my head. And then Kirby shows up to your planet, and you're like, oh, what a cute like little pink ball. And then like your planet gets attacked by demons, and then just Kirby eats them all. You're not afraid of the demons. You're more afraid of Kirby because Kirby just ate all the demons. So yeah, that part of the plot, that part of the narrative, I really, really appreciated. And they try to make it this justification, right, of, oh, we're only hunting to like protect the balance of the environment or to protect people's settlements when crazed monsters come through, and really kind of shift the narrative away from, hey, we're killing 8,000 of that monster so we can make pants and shirts for our guys and play dress up. Because protecting the balance of the environment is a better message than we just wiped out an entire ecosystem for Fashion Week, right? That's a way better message. I alluded to some gameplay during talking about the dev history and kind of what the game is all about. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail about the gameplay and like break down every weapon for you. The thing I really wanted to touch on for the gameplay is this idea of streamlining that we mentioned in the development history, right? Where when they were approaching the initial planning phases for this game, they were concerned about making it accommodating to their new base of players, to a bigger audience that had discovered Monster Hunter for the first time. And so in order to do this, they made some changes to the core Monster Hunter formula, like eliminating the excursion mode, and a lot of the fights feel like they're really fast and you can be way more aggressive than in the previous two games. Although if you're playing this game at like the highest level, you can be really aggressive, and people that speedrun this game can hunt monsters in like a minute, and it's absolutely insane. But for the average person like me, who I would say has like an average amount of skill for somebody who played this game a lot, the changes and the streamlining were really evident. And when this game came out, I think that manifested in this online discourse that was pretty loud and pretty ugly about people shouting in every TikTok video or YouTube analysis of the game that I watched that Capcom had made the game too easy. And this got a little bit ugly. And I read some pretty like awful comments. People were being real dicks about it, which shocking. People being dicks on the internet. But how incredibly surprising, right? It really kind of felt like that same elitist attitude towards people who play Souls games and are like, oh, you beat the Souls game using the Estus Flask? Well, let me know when you beat it with no Estus Flask and your guy's naked and you just have a giant club and you don't level up at all. And it's like, well, yeah, that's fine, but you can like play the game however you want because the tools are in the game to play it however you want. Beating a game one way does not make you any better than a person who beat it in another way that maybe you view as easy. What I'm trying to say is the conversation on saying a game is too easy in a game like this is pretty shallow commentary. I think it lacks nuance, it lacks context, and I think it's a failure to understand what is actually going on with this game. And again, it's very elitist. In my experience in general, Monster Hunter fans and the community members of the Monster Hunter fandom have been incredibly welcoming to new players like myself. And I remember when I had played and teamed up with random people, matchmake for the first time, that people were really welcoming and accommodating and understanding of when I would die, when I would cart, and they would give me tips and pointers and stuff like that. And it wasn't in like a elitist, snobbish sort of way. It was a very welcoming way because Monster Hunter fans want people to like their games so that they get more games and the games sell more. So like I said, I think saying the game is too easy is the wrong conversation. It lacks context and it lacks nuance. And I will try to explain my thought process here. Well, I won't say that the game is too easy. I will convey to you that there was not a single moment during my playthrough of the main story or the post-story content with high rank that I fainted, which is known as carding, during any fight. And this was surprising to me. During both Monster Hunter World and Iceborne and Rise and Sunbreak, there were several story and post-game fights that were kind of woven into the story that kicked my ass. And these served as checks along the way to test your skill, to test your loadouts, to test your gear, to make sure that you were keeping up with what the requirements of progress were. Now, I understand that this being my third Monster Hunter game, that I am a more experienced player now. I guess I would consider myself a veteran, having spent several hundred hours in both of the previous Monster Hunter games that I played. I understand how the systems work. I understand gear. I understand loadouts. I understand how to approach fights. I understand when to be aggressive and when to know to back off. So I understand that I'm probably going to breeze through any early game content because that content is inherently easier than the more difficult fights you get in the post game. But even with that caveat thrown in there, the game does feel very streamlined, and not in the same way that I would say Rise felt streamlined. I originally said that I thought Rise was a streamlined version of World to get you into the best part of the game, which is fighting the monsters, right? Rise was streamlined to take advantage of the Switch's inferior hardware, and there are still some fights during the story and post-game content in that game, and then in later added content, that are incredibly difficult and incredibly brutal and required me dying several times to understand the flow of the fight. When I first fought Magnamalo for the first time, solo, by myself, I died probably 10 to 12 times learning that fight. And then I went back and I got some better gear and I got some better loadouts to help me with some of the status stuff that Magnamalo would do. And I learned the ebbs and flows of that fight. So Rise was streamlined in a different way. Wilds has an open and connected world that I feel lacks some of the intricate verticality and complexity of some of Monster Hunter World's biomes. And I know why this was done. It's again to get people into the main course of Monster Hunter, which is hunting the monsters, right? All of the little annoyances of World to get to that point are no longer present. Gathering tracks is gone. Having to chase the monster across the map and back is gone. With the addition of the Sacred, it's very deliberately designed to make sure you're getting to the hunt part of the gameplay as easily and as effortless as possible. Like I said, the Sacred will autopath to the monster. You don't have to do anything. And while there are some nice additions of being able to switch weapons, sharpen your weapons while traveling to the monster, it's certainly a simplification of the rough edges of World, where you basically had to like walk after a monster who fled to the other edge of the map, is what it would feel like. So an example of this is in Monster Hunter World, the first stage you go to is the Ancient Forest. And the Ancient Forest is this very complicated map that has different levels that you can traverse that are all kind of built around this big central tree that you kind of spiral up as you explore the biome. The fight that best exemplifies the interconnectedness of the Ancient Forest is, I think, a fight against a Rathalos there, because the Rathalos or Rathian have a nest at the very top of the gigantic tree that the entire biome is based around. And if you start fighting the Rathalos on the main level and it flies up to the top of where its nest is, it will take you like 2 or 3 minutes to like walk your ass over there. Actually, sometimes longer. Sometimes it'll take you like 5 minutes to walk all the way over there to continue the fight. Now, there were camps you could set up across the Ancient Forest and fast travel to them and be where you needed to be and cut down the travel time a little bit. But there were times where I would get to the nest and then the Rathalos would just leave again, like fly all the way back down to the main level. And while there was an annoyance to that, it made me feel like I was hunting the monster, right? Like I was chasing it. Like the monster wouldn't just move 10 feet away and just wait for you to catch up and beat its ass, right? It would move around. It would fly up to its nest, check on its egg. It would fly down to the river and get a drink. It would fly over here and catch its next meal. And that had this effect of making the game feel like, A, you were actually hunting the monsters, and 2, that the monsters were living amongst this environment. Whereas in Wilds, the monster does move away from you, but you can jump on the sacred and basically keep pace with it all the way there. So it doesn't really feel like you're hunting the monster after it leaves. It just feels like you're tailgating it to the next location. I found the pacing of the monster fights very weird as well. I don't think I had any hunts that lasted longer than 15 minutes tops. This is including in the post-game high rank endgame content. Even against the hardest fight in that stretch, which I would consider to probably be Gore Magala, fought solo, and it didn't take me longer than 15 minutes to defeat it. Whereas World and Rise hunts, I remember, even before crazy stuff like Master Rank or Iceborne or all that stuff got added, hunts could take me 30 to 40 minutes. And I think the main culprit of this is that weapons have more options to deal more damage to monsters more quickly. And this is where I'm circling back to the focus and wounding system, because that gameplay mechanic allows you to knock monsters down more consistently. Part of the flow of fighting a monster is kind of poking and prodding at it and positioning it and waiting for moments that you can kind of engage with it and fire off your bigger combos for bigger damage. That's kind of the dance. That's kind of the push and pull of the fight between the hunter and the monster. With this focus and wound system, I felt like I was knocking down the monsters so constantly that I had so many more opportunities to dip into my bigger, longer combos and deal more damage. And when you have more prolonged periods of monster inactivity where you and your party can fire off higher damage combos, it significantly shortens the length of the fight. And again, I understand that might be a caveat in there, because at this point, I'm much better at Monster Hunter than I was when I first started playing. So, like, of course, main story stuff would be easier for me, but I was still expecting to have some of that challenge in there. And I think part of the reason why the hunts were made, I don't want to say the hunts were made shorter, because I can't confirm that like HP pools were reduced, or I can't confirm any of that deeper mechanical stuff. I'm sure people that know how to dive into that stuff and crunch numbers and do all that can confirm whether you're dealing more damage, whether the monsters have less health, something like that. But I felt like the monsters just died really, really, really fast. And I feel like this is because their main guiding principle was they wanted you to stay in this world for multiple hunts and get you into hunts more quickly. There's no returning to the town in between every hunt. There's no kitchen where you go to visit the Meowscular chef for your meal every time. So you can cook anywhere on a little campfire, and you could potentially sustain one meal across multiple hunts if you do it fast enough. You don't have to return to a quest board to post a new hunt. A quest will automatically start if you start fighting a monster in the open world. You have a party system that anytime that any of your party members start a quest, you can immediately join them in that quest. So it's very much designed with this idea of being able to get as many hunts in succession as possible, because that's what people really want to do. And it kind of removes this cyclical ritual that I described earlier of post a quest, grab equipment, eat a meal, hunt, and repeat, that is so ingrained in Monster Hunter's identity. And that cyclical ritual just doesn't exist in this game. There are times where you go back to camp and you forge a weapon, but you don't have to. It's not required. In the old game, you'd be forced to. Now, some of you guys might think I'm crazy for arguing that I like the way it was done in World better, but this was the core loop that got me into the game, and it was just the way that the game was. And I liked being able to do my hunt, go back to the town, see what armor I could make with the stuff I was looking for, and then prep for the next hunt so I could switch out my loadouts and stuff. I think it comes to this idea of friction in video games. In this era of gaming, as we seek to remake and remaster everything, and with gaming as incentivized on profit and revenue as it is, I think that a lot of the design of a lot of bigger games is done intentionally to remove friction from video games and to make it so that it will appeal to the widest amount of people possible. I don't necessarily agree with this. I liked the friction. I liked the obtuseness of the mechanics and the systems in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. Not all friction, not all struggle, not all obtuseness in a game is bad. When you look to smooth out the rough edges, to optimize the friction out of those games, I think that we forget that the friction is somehow inherently ingrained in the identity of those games. Little quirks or little things that you had to play around are important to the game's identity as much as anything else. And Monster Hunter was always rough around the edges like this. That gameplay loop that wasn't always convenient. That aspect of chasing a Rathalos across the map all the way up to the nest, only to have it fly back down as soon as you go there. Menus upon menus upon menus. And I'm not saying that there isn't a better way to do things, because I think that things can always be improved upon. But Monster Hunter grew and had fans before its explosion in popularity, and those fans put up with way more obtuse systems than us newer fans have ever had to put up with. I mean, throwing a paintball at a monster to figure out where it goes when it leaves the area, that's insane to me. But in optimizing the game so that the exploration, the gameplay loop, the fights are all faster, it just feels to me like something is missing from this Monster Hunter game that I love about the others that I have played. And this is for me to just bring it full circle and say that I don't think Wilds is a bad game. It's really, really fun. I had a blast playing it by myself, with all of my friends, people in the community. The locales are all very cool. There wasn't a single monster fight that I didn't like or I couldn't stand. The new combat additions to all the weapons give them an added dimension that they didn't have before. And I even understand why Capcom, a publicly traded company whose goal at the end of the day is to make money, would sand down some of those rough edges to appeal to their now wider audience. Some of whom are more casual, who won't spend 1,000 hours getting every single piece of gear to perfectly optimize a build for every single fight. But compared to what came before, for me at least, something just feels different, and not in a way that makes me like Wilds more than World or Rise. And I think that in their quest to sand down the rough edges, I just feel like there's something missing, and it makes me a little bit sad, because the Monster Hunter franchise was able to grow to the size that it was before Wilds came out with those obtuse systems in place, with that friction, with having to go and manually pick up every single ingredient you want to pick up, having to run around across all the maps that were more labyrinthine and felt more natural, having to go back to town after every single hunt and engage with that gameplay loop. The fandom grew with all of those things in place. So it's not like they weren't tolerant of those things. It was like, how do we make this even more smoother so we can capture the people that maybe fell out because of that gameplay loop that has friction in it? But again, that's okay, because that is the identity of Monster Hunter Wilds. If I want an experience like Monster Hunter World, I can go and play that game. It still has a very active player base. It has a ton of content. Like I said, it's routinely on sale for a very good price. But as a person who talks about games, I can sit here and say that the same soul that I fell in love with in World is not present in Wilds in the same capacity. All those rough, non-optimized systems in World combined to create an incredibly satisfying gameplay loop that the entire game revolved around. When you smooth that out, you inevitably lose something. And Again, I recognize I'm trying to tiptoe around the blanket statement of, oh, game easy, because again, I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a difference between just making the game easier, which you could do by just upping the damage that weapons deal and decreasing the health pool of the monsters. I think that's significantly different than making all of these systems that interlock more efficient. And again, I do understand and I do recognize that I'm better at this game series. I understand that I'm better at Monster Hunter on a more fundamental level than I have ever been. And again, I also do realize that Capcom will release post-game content that is hard. That is what they do. The difficulty between world story content and the high-level content is night and day. But I struggled more with Base World and Iceborne, and I just appreciated those games more because of it. So, friction in video games is not always bad. Smoothing things out to be as efficient and streamlined and welcoming as possible is not always a good thing. Games are designed for a reason. Like I would never want them to do anything that would make it feel like they were streamlining a Souls game so much that it made it feel too easy, or that a Souls game lost some of what makes it a Souls game, essentially. And I think this is probably what a lot of people thought when there was the whole thing around outlets were when Elden Ring came out and they were starting to report about how Elden Ring was a lot of people's first Souls games that they were able to finish, and then everybody was like, oh, that's because they made it too easy. It's not that they made Elden Ring too easy. They just provided you with more options and ways to do things. And maybe that's the same in Wilds, but I feel like the streamlining and efficiency chasing in Wilds make it a game that I just don't connect with as much as I did with Monster Hunter World. At the end of the day, I still had a great time with Monster Hunter Wilds, even though it changes some things that I feel like, for me, changed the overall experience and didn't quite represent what I love about Monster Hunter. This will probably be my least played Monster Hunter so far, and I doubt I will be able to return to it much in the coming years. Not because I think it's a bad game, not because I think it's too easy, not because I feel like it is streamlined beyond recognition, simply for the fact that my life has changed pretty drastically. Like I said, I had a second child that was born and he came home from the hospital. So having two kids, one that is 1.5 and one that is now a newborn, makes it very difficult to be able to devote time to hunt monsters, to make progress towards gear sets. And yeah, I just don't find myself engaging with Wilds as much as I really thought I was going to when the game was first announced. And that's just because my life is drastically different. I'm really glad I got to experience it when I did. I'm glad I got to play the entire base game. Going forward into the future, I'll probably have to watch others enjoy it from afar. Now, to circle back on my proclamation that Wilds would be my unquestioned game of the year this year, that there was no doubt in my mind that this would be the game I played the most this year, I find that opinion is no longer accurate. And I think I've moved off of this opinion for a couple of reasons. One is the perceived changes made by making the game more accessible to a wider range of fans, which again, is not a bad thing. I understand why they're doing it. I don't hate it. But to me, it doesn't feel like the game that I really love, the experience that I really love. So if I'm going to choose to play a Monster Hunter experience, I'm going to go play World instead if I do get time to play Monster Hunter. And the second reason is the existence of Expedition 33, which will definitely be an episode coming up in the near future where we will talk about Expedition 33. Even if this particular iteration of Monster Hunter has things that made me not like it as much as World or as Rise, I'm never going to root against Monster Hunter to be successful in any of its iterations, right? I'm a fan of the series now. It's ingrained in me. It's a part of me. Monster Hunter World is one of my top 10 games of all time now. That list is at most times immovable. So the fact that I was putting such a modern game up there in my top 10 games is kind of insane. It takes a really special game to crack that list. So I will always root for the continued success of a series that I had no intention of engaging with or loving as much as I do now. We as the fans definitely deserve it, and I hope that Monster Hunter continues to find more and more success. With that being said, we're going to wrap up the episode here. If you'd like to catch up with everything that is going on in the Unlockables, please head over and check out our Linktree, linktr.ee/Unlockables podcast. That is where you can find all the links to all the good stuff. Our socials, if you want to, the link for the Discord is there as well. You can jump into the Discord and talk about Monster Hunter Wilds or any other game that you'd like to. If I could direct your attention to one platform in particular, the YouTube link should be on the link tree as well. I'm going to start doing more dedicated YouTube content. I released earlier in this year a video on my analysis of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom and what that game tells us about the future of the Zelda franchise. I'm really, really proud of it. It's actually one of the most successful video game content related things I've ever put out. So thank you guys all for the support on that video. Go check it out. I've got some really cool things coming up on the YouTube. A video on my first playthrough of Chrono Trigger is scheduled for later this year, and I'm going to analyze that game. Being the 30th anniversary of Chrono Trigger and being the first time I played it, I think I have some interesting things to say about it, hopefully. And there'll be other stuff that I put out on YouTube as I'm able to write scripts and record. So please go and check that stuff out. And all the podcast platforms should be on Linktree as well. Listen to where you want. Like, comment, leave a rating, leave a review, all that good stuff. The engagement really, really helps me out, helps people discover the show, and helps me get into contact with more people who want to talk about games. And that's really the whole point of this whole thing that I'm doing. So thank you guys so much for listening. Maybe if I get some free time, I'll be able to see you out there doing some hunts. And remember, it's not just the story of video games, it's the story of you.
Steve, stay cool here. Long time listener, first time caller. Real happy to be calling in to Unlockables. I love what you did with Kingdom Hearts. Real bold to make a podcast about Goofy committing war crimes. Now keeping the lights from the dark. Real good message to send to children. Well, anyway, let's talk about that Monster Hunter Wilds. As I like to call it, my game, because Capcom is at it again. Because back in '98, I did some time voluntarily at the Southeast Michigan Reptile and Exotic Animal Sanctuary. A real place, real monsters. And one of them had antlers made of teeth, and you think Capcom just made that up? I don't think so. They stole that from me. I sent them a letter once, handwritten, including a diagram, a Polaroid of a Komodo dragon wearing a boot. No reply. And then what happens next year? Next year, Monster Hunter drops in Japan. And it's not like everyone's obsessed with big swords and lizard birds. Think that's a coincidence? Please. I know a memory is siphoned when I see one. And I don't trust Capcom. Now since they cut me out of Power Stone, I was supposed to be a secret character named Dumpster Carl. I signed something at a bus station and they ghosted me. So, yeah, I thought I'd call in and let you know. Hope you enjoy your little dino chop safari. Just remember, real monsters, they don't drop loot. They leave behind unpaid bills, restraining orders. If Capcom's listening to this podcast, I want my likeness rights back. And I got the receipts.